This is cs952 Introduction to Web Technologies and Design, and in this video we're going to be talking about CSS selectors. We're going to be talking about tags, IDs, and classes. Now, generally speaking, we can divide most web design activities into two main categories. We're either working with HTML or we're working with CSS. When we're working with HTML, we're working with the structure or the content of the website. So I'm in Dreamweaver and I'm going to switch over to Code View. And so everything that we see over here, all this code, this is all HTML. When we're working with CSS, we're working with the appearance of our website. So over here in Dreamweaver on the right hand side, we have a panel here called CSS Designer. And this is where we make all of the changes to our CSS files. And we keep our HTML in files with the HTML extension. So here are all the pages for our final website, and they're all .html files. And we keep all of our CSS in this folder in files with the .css extension. CSS selectors are really important because they connect the HTML structure in our HTML files to the CSS rules that we keep in our CSS files. CSS selectors are the common element between these two different files. You can find the same CSS selectors in an HTML file. You'll find that same selector in the CSS file. So it's like the glue, it's the link that ties our HTML to our CSS. So we're going to be working with three different kinds of selectors: tags, IDs, and classes. Tags refer to fundamental HTML elements. So when I'm in Dreamweaver, let's switch to Live View, and I'm looking at my Document Object panel here on the lower right hand corner. All these little blocks that we see, these are all tags. Tags are fundamental HTML elements, and we do not make tags, they already exist. In fact, tags are the oldest part of web pages. Tags are the markup part of HTML, or hypertext markup language. That's where we get markup from. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to a little demonstration file that I put together for us to have a look at. Okay. So I'm working on a little web page design here. And I want to make this, it says Internet Sales Central. I want to make this into a headline. And I do that, I'm just going to drag and highlight over this text. And now right now, this text has no special property to it at all. If we look at it in Code View, it's just a line of text that says Internet Sales Central. That's all. If we look over here in our DOM panel, there's nothing that shows that this text is even in our DOM. It's not identified in any way because our DOM panel only shows us HTML tags, fundamental HTML components. So let's assign Internet Sales Central, let's assign it the HTML markup of heading 1. And I do that by, in my property inspector where we have format, right now it says none because we have none. I'm going to click here and I'm going to give it a format of heading 1. Now, when I do that, notice that in our Document Object Model panel, we now have an H1 tag that says here is your heading 1. And my text is now wrapped in H1 tags. So we have the beginning H1 tag, and we have the closing H1 tag. Let's look and see what this looks like. We're going to switch to Live View. Now when we switch to Live View, it's big and it's bold because one of the properties of the H1 tag is to display text in a very large manner. The H1 tag is the largest tag text is going to be the largest. If we chose a smaller tag, if we chose a H2 instead, if I switch to H2, you'll see it's a little bit smaller. And H3 is smaller still. So by default, H1 is our largest. So what if I want my H1 tag to be blue? I want this to stand out as being some blue text. How do I create a CSS selector for this tag? Well, first I'm going to create a new source to save all of my custom CSS. And I'm going to go under CSS Designer. And I'm going to add a new source. This is exactly the same steps that we go through when we're working with our final project. I'm going to say, create a new source. I'm going to create a new CSS file. I want to link to this file and browse. I want to save it in my CSS folder. And I'm going to call it styles, S-T-Y-L-E-S. Same name that we use for our final project. We're going to link to this file. Let's say OK. All right. So now I have a new CSS file. Remember, tags, IDs, classes, CSS selectors, they're the things that are in common between our HTML and our CSS. So if I look over here in my HTML, I can see I've got an H1 tag right here, and it's wrapping around my Internet Sales Central. That's what made Internet Sales Central suddenly large and big on the page. Okay, so I'm going to create a new selector. We create new selectors right here. I'm going to add a selector, and when I click to add the selector, Dreamweaver gives us a list of suggestions, what Dreamweaver thinks we would like to use for our selector. But all we need to do is to create a selector for H1. H1 is a fundamental element of HTML, so I just type in H1. Now if I want my text to be blue, okay, I'm just going to go down here to my text properties. Let's make a little bit more room so I can see what I've got. And I'm going to go to text, and I'm going to go to my color. And I'm going to choose, I've got various colors here. I'm going to type in the color for blue, which is pound 0000FF. And if you've watched the video on HTML color, remember that we define our colors by combining red, green, and blue. And if I want a pure blue color, that's no red, no green, and no blue. And since these numbers are written in pairs, 00, that means no red. Another 00 means no green, and FF means all blue. Or if we switch to the RGB format, you can see that we have 00 and 255. This is all explained in a lot more detail in the HTML color section. But in case you're wondering, how did he know what the color blue is? It's just because I just selected the color that's 100% blue. So let's hit enter. So when I do that, I can see that my text, Internet Sales Central, is now solid blue. Okay. If I look over here under my code, it just still, all we see is H1, Internet Sales Central. There's nothing here that shows me that this is blue. But if I go and look at, I'm going to go and show the code in my CSS file. If I click on go to code, I can see here is H1. The H1 that we see right here in my CSS is the exact same H1 that we see right here in my HTML. So we can see that our CSS selectors are the common elements that we find in both our HTML and in our CSS files. So let's switch back to live.